Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Upper State Street Regional Action Plan meeting that occurs every Thursday at 10 o'clock. Good news to start us off today. I received a picture from Brad Fieldhouse that there was clearing on the 101 off ramp at 154. So I know that they've been Caltrans is making their way from Goleta south, and they have been very active. So good news that they have made it to the Upper State Street region. So we're looking forward to hearing more on the results of that work this morning. And as we kind of start off and really focus in on our priority regions, really want to hear from all of you. And there's a number of residents on the call. Jane, I know Dr. Brickford is here, Vicki, Will. What have you observed over the last few months? We've been really focusing in not only law enforcement, but outreach, the Rose Garden Inn program transition. Have you seen improvements? New concerns in existing priority regions, and any discussion on new priority regions to focus on. So just a reminder, they're included on our agenda in terms of the top areas that we identified at the start of the Upper State Street Regional Action Plan. And again, a lot of work, including outreach, safe parking program outreach, law enforcement in those regions. And we want to hear from you about your current observations. Vicki.
So, okay, there we go. I think it's gotten better. They're on hope for sure. It's gotten better. We still don't have any cleanup from the mall. That's still, I think, a big problem. But I think there seems to be less transients there on Larada. I mean, there's still some, right, but they seem to be, some of them seem to be moving around during the day.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure because they'll be gone, but particularly Essie and the Cadillac and stuff, they come and they go. So I don't know, maybe they found work, maybe they've got projects, maybe I don't know what they're doing, but they come, and I thought they were gone, but they have been back off and on. So, but I think, all in all, I think it's getting better. I don't think it's a problem we're ever going to 100% solve, but we just keep working at it, and I think it's good. I thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. And I just appreciate you, again, committing the time and working closely with us and being there for that first site visit too around your neighborhood. And Kayla, you were nodding. There has been quite a bit of engagement with some folks, that are experiencing vehicular homeless in that region. And yeah, they have found work and are working through other philanthropic partners to be able to cover insurance costs and again, be able to really take those steps to perhaps find a new housing opportunity. But Kayla, anything to add there? I know you've been working closely with the safe parking program for those folks who are in that Hope, Larada, Hitchcock neighborhood.
Yeah, so we've been working with Elmer, who is the safe parking case manager, planning another outreach day to that Hope, Larada, Hitchcock area to be able to continue engaging with the folks that are in that region. Some less likely to become a safe parking client at first, but maybe more willing over time with rapport building and trust. But in the meantime, being able to connect them with necessary resources for things like insurance, vehicle repairs, to make their present shelter situation a much more sustainable option, a safe option, so that when the safe parking program maybe finally wins them over, they have what's necessary in place to be able to enroll in that program. So again, planning another outreach day, but I've been working with the individual you mentioned in the Cadillac to get her insurance costs and vehicle repairs and registration and all of those things in order through other philanthropic partners. So over time, kind of building rapport with these individuals.
Great, thank you, Kayla. Larry, I see your hand up. Good morning.
Good morning. I would say, as far as what's changed or not changed, I would say it's actually not improved and possibly worse than it was beforehand.
Okay.
I think there are an increased number of unhoused people that are now wandering around the neighborhood during all times of the day. When before it was kind of isolated to early morning, late afternoon. Now I see it way more frequently. Um, that being said, there are a pretty decent number of unhoused people who are still hanging around the Rose Garden area. And I don't know what else to say. So I don't think it has gotten any better in our neighborhood specifically. But as we sit here and meet and talk about Upper State Street area, I'm kind of interested to find out what's happening elsewhere in the city as well.
We can definitely provide that information as it relates to regional action plans in other neighborhoods, as well as our broader strategic plan. But I just want to touch on your observations, what you're seeing, improvements or continued concerns, and where those priority regions are. And then we'll loop back, letting you know what's happening in other neighborhoods throughout the city. But Larry, can you be specific about the neighborhood you're referring to and where you see now more activity happening in the early AM, late PM, and now throughout the day?
Sure. The area that I'm aware of is the area between Hitchcock and Las Positas.
Okay.
My office being at Las Positas and State, and my bank being at Hitchcock. So I'm very often traveling in that area.
Okay. Okay.
And
I appreciate that. Kayla and I, walked that area last month during our site visit, and we weren't able to engage individuals. If that has shifted, we can absolutely do that walkthrough. And again, I know that CityNet, while present until January 31st, was doing that regular walkthrough as well. But Councilman Friedman, any additional observations on that Hitchcock to Las Positas or other areas of concern?
I think those are covered. I know you did the walk in that area over by the Denny's and in that area. But yeah, they're still on Hitchcock. I still see individuals there. One thing I just want to bring up that I heard about, it happened about 2 weeks ago. And I don't know the facts about it, but there were a couple of teenagers that had an incident with someone who most likely was homeless in that area. Okay. And so it's in that general area, and the police have addressed it. But it is got reported to me from a couple residents. So there are still issues going on in that area, but especially around Hitchcock, I see it there. But I think what we're doing now, we're having more of a presence, so I think it is helping. Okay. And there's this transition period going on with the closure of the roads too, where I think people are in the neighborhood, but maybe going back to where they were before.
Right. Is there a particular time of day, Councilmember Friedman or Larry, that you suggest that we again walk through and try to engage with some of these individuals?
It's tough because I walk around at different times of the day, but I've seen individuals there a little, not earlier in the morning, but a little bit later, especially after Whole Foods opens. There's more panhandling there. It's the same individuals, and I see some of the similar cars parked in that area that are obviously people are living in them, and they're there kind of in the mid-morning to later afternoon, but then they're gone. So that's what I've noticed. Larry, if you want to chime in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's probably mid-morning to late afternoon, but I'd also want to add that in seeing the presence of the unhoused people wandering around the neighborhood, the flip side of that is I have not actually witnessed drug use, harassment, or any other, really negative activity. Their presence is noted, not behavior that would alert me to anything.
Okay. No, I appreciate that specificity too. Sergeant DeJean, anything to add in terms of what you've seen and what law enforcement has experienced up in the Upper State Street region in the last week or so, especially with the transition of the Rose Garden Inn?
Hello, good morning. I would say that much as I reported last week, things are, I believe, calming down on the north end. It's been a downward trend. It would seem for probably the last 6 weeks, just based upon enforcement activity. I was up there again this morning. Very little contacts occurring this morning up on the north end either. As you all know, we have the North End overtime assignment that's been running. That actually ends today. The last shift is occurring today. I will put some stats into the chat when I'm done talking, just to share what that looks like. But based upon those numbers, there were lots of contacts, a lot of warnings given, which is a great way to kind of try to correct some of the criminal behavior. And there were definitely citations and arrests made. I'm happy to answer questions. I feel like I'd be repeating what I said last week. There's always been an transient element on the north end, and I think that there will continue to be. And it seems to me, in my opinion, it's better than it was within the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Thank you, Sergeant DeJean. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the update too. We'll at the end of the month have a data reporting meeting as well. And we're going to be working with Sergeant DeJean on reports from law enforcement during that weekly data reporting meeting as well. Liz?
Thank you, Barbara. So just wanted to add that that whole area is an area known to the South Coast Outreach Team. So that is a group that meets weekly. Their caseworkers, Be-Well, public health staff. It's an area that is known to them, and it is an area that is frequented by caseworkers. So it is an area that is known, and people do go out and engage individuals. Of course, we all know the challenge is always, as we've mentioned before, the resistance to service, lack of available housing options. So, but it is an area that is regularly discussed in case meetings with outreach workers across the service provider spectrum.
Absolutely. And just for those new to the terminology, the South County Coordinated Outreach Team is a county facilitated outreach meeting of service providers across the region, specific to working with individuals experiencing homelessness in the South County area, from Goleta, Santa Barbara to Carpinteria. So it is, a coordination of folks, multiple agencies working with individuals, being able to address their unique needs over time. And like we have said many times before, a number of interactions are required to build trust and rapport and ensure that someone's embracing services as they're provided. Jeff, I wanted to turn it to you to answer the question about what's happening in our other neighborhoods throughout the city, because you are facilitating a waterfront regional action plan, East Side regional action plan, and downtown State Street RAP as well.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I put the information in the chat. If anyone wants to join these other RAPs, just send me an email to add you to the ongoing email list. Similar concerns. There's the reason why we do the RAPs is because each neighborhood has its own unique features and own populations on the streets or living in vehicles experiencing homelessness. So data-wise, waterfront shows the most impacts and the most individuals experiencing homelessness are in that region. Then State Street downtown, and then East Side. As we do the point in time count, I'm looking forward to seeing what the data looks like across the board again for Santa Barbara City as we move into the next year. But very similar concerns. And the reason why we do them neighborhood by neighborhood too is like, we are very thankful for the information and the involvement you have with us and with all the partners.
Thank you, Jeff. And again, both individuals experiencing homelessness and those impacts are discussed in each of those RAP calls, just like as we do with Upper State Street RAP every single week. Any other questions, comments about priority regions, observations in the region since the start of the regional action plan, or any other suggestions on new areas to prioritize? Okay, I want to transition to the temporary shelter, safe shelter project at the Rose Garden Inn to address or mitigate, I should say, encampment related fires over the last 6 months. Brad, I see you on the call. I know that CityNet and the City of Santa Barbara staff are working together to capture a data-driven impact report of the outcomes of that 6-month program, and that is forthcoming. So we don't have up-to-date exact data from today, but we have been updating everyone weekly on the wrap with information that is available to us. But anything to provide, I wanted to just take a moment about the original goals of the program, our experience in coming up with the proposal, implementing the work over the last 6 months, and working with all of you to coordinate those activities over this period of time. But Brad, I'll send it to you first before I dig in there.
Yeah, so we are no longer at the Rose Garden officially. I was not in the last week's meeting, so there may have been some. So you are, excuse me, you are accurate in that we are sort of finalizing the data report. We still are working with a number of individuals. Unfortunately, right as we were transitioning, PATH was in lockdown because of COVID. So there were a number of dynamics that are working themselves out. We still are managing, well, I mean, some of the headlines that are going to be coming out, right? So all but one person of everybody that we engaged is still working with us. So we have one person that is not returning our phone calls, as you know. So we have only one person that's not working with us. Everybody else is working with us. We had, you know, a number of people permanently housed, and so we're sort of we are not on site at the Rose Garden at all anymore. Officially, there is some construction going on, and you see a bin out there. That is not us. We are completely out. We are working with a number of individuals that are not in any shelter. They're in some sort of on the streets, whether they're in a vehicle or nearby. I do not think that any of those individuals, again, are any of the ones nearby. They are clearing that Caltrans. I don't know if any of you saw that today, but that Caltrans off-ramp is being cleared today. So that
I mentioned it at the top of the call. Great news. Thank you for sharing that, Brad.
Yeah, and that's probably worth monitoring. So just to kind of see how that kind of impacts the region. We still are responding. We're working with PD. I was, just hanging out with Dijon and the officers the other day. So we are monitoring that. We will still provide ongoing case management, but I think in terms of sort of if there's some general learnings, it sort of accomplished what we were hoping to accomplish, right? Sort of proves the idea that, most people took us up on the offer. They got out of the fire-prone encampments. They thrived in some capacity by just being sheltered and housed and fed and worked on, almost everybody's document ready. All those kind of details we are tightening up right now. We do have beds available at PATH, not all of the ones that we have designated. We offered everybody beds in some location. Our beds are back available at PATH. We have not filled them all yet. So we're sort of working with a number of individuals still very actively and responding to any, based on this wrap, our team is back responding to the encampment link, which is in the chat. That's kind of the general thing. If there's any specific questions, I can field them, but that's, we are looking to sort of wrap up our data analysis sort of real time to give to the city so that we can be ready to go public with, sort of the results.
Great. Thank you for that. And like you had mentioned, CityNet staff has now been redirected back to outreach in all of the neighborhoods throughout the city of Santa Barbara. So it's really, really important for you to provide that data through the encampment link. And there's also an option to report individuals of concern. So I see Marilyn's comment and question in the chat. Please, if you see something, use that link. Kayla can provide the link again, reporting that data, because CityNet is active now, back on outreach, as staff was diverted the last few months to the Rose Garden Inn temporary safe shelter program. So those are prioritized, those are fielded, outreach is assigned as needed, code enforcement's assigned as needed, as well as Caltrans and the sustainability and environmental division.
One other thing real quick, just to sort of say that what our staff is doing is that a number of individuals are recently housed and are housed, and we're providing that wraparound service. That's separate from this contract, but we've transitioned to a different team. Over time, I know, for example, at the McDonald's, well, I'm not referencing any specific individual, but even some of the panhandling are not unhoused people, actually. So there's a number of dynamics that play themselves out on all around the town, including up on Upper State. A number of those individuals are not unhoused. They just use this as a means of securing additional funding.
I agree with that. We're familiar with a number of those folks who have now achieved housing and are still looking for that extra cash, for sure. Councilmember Sneddon, I see your hand up.
Thank you, and thanks, Brad, for the update. I just want to clarify, so last week, I think we were hearing that there were like 27 individuals who went back to the street, but were supposed to go to PATH or Salvation Army, but there was the COVID issue. And so when you're saying now there are beds at PATH, does that mean those 27 individuals are all in shelter now?
No.
Okay.
That you are accurate in saying that those paths weren't available. So yeah, the number is around 20 something. I don't know if 27. I know that was a number at one point. I know that's probably come down since then. But there are still beds available at PATH that are designated for transition in this project, and they are not all full. So I don't know real time as we sit here at this moment, if any of those 20-ish people are availing themselves to those beds. I don't know that answer.
But there are beds that are available to those 20-something-ish people if they choose to take them.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great news. Thank you.
And of the 27, 20 had accepted that referral to emergency shelter, either at Salvation Army, PATH, or Rescue Mission. Unfortunately, we were in a place where those referrals, new client referrals, were not being facilitated because of COVID, positive COVID tests and public health protocols. So we were at a number of 7 or 8 individuals were going to be returning to the streets by choice, and 20 individuals had accepted that referral. And then we were in a place with that week of January 31st being one where we were dealing with the Delta variant, Omicron variant, and the surges. And we were not in a place to be able to facilitate those referrals. So I think Brad is saying now that there are reopenings happening, if folks, as they keep engaging with CityNet, will take on that referral, that's still being facilitated. So I think that's another reason why in capturing the data, we want to make sure that there's a little bit more time to be able to see if we're able to achieve more positive street exits there.
Thank you, because that was pretty troubling to know that there was that many people who wanted shelter and couldn't get it. So thank you.
It was a tough moment, I think, for everybody
100% agree.
across the board. Yeah.
Bad timing.
Yeah. Larry.
I had a couple of things I wanted to add. I didn't know what was the right time in the agenda, but the first thing that popped into mind is that there needs to be more dissemination of clear information to the NIMBYs on Nextdoor and EdHat, because they're getting up in arms about how much worse things are now that Rose Garden is closed. So the perceptions are not really reflecting the reality of what's been done and what is planned to be done. And somehow there needs to be some better communication with the community. So that was one suggestion. And the other thing that came into my mind is this nice warm weather is going to end at some point, and it's going to go back to being very cold. And I'm curious to know what is in place for the protection of the unhoused people when that happens in a few weeks.
I appreciate that, Larry. I attempted to throw myself into Nextdoor. It was an experiment that was a little brutal. So you're right. I think, I was trying to share kind of the data that was available, keeping updates, as folks were making comments. I think even providing recording links to these meetings have been a little bit helpful. But as we get the final data report to the Rose Garden Inn, and even the activity that we're seeing on Upper State Street region, we can post those reports. The city can step in to post that on behalf of the city of Santa Barbara, and try to keep that information a little bit more accessible. You're right. There is a lot of misinformation being shared, and we are trying to attempt to do that through channels that are a little bit more manageable. Nextdoor is a tough place to be. I will admit to that. But I think, again, when we have that data impact report, we will share that far and wide, as well as, ensuring that folks have access to when this meeting happens, to recordings, our contact information, my contact information, Kayla's, so that if they have concerns, we're able to address those one-on-one as well. And then as for inclement weather, we have the Freedom Warming Centers. So those are activated when the temperature is set to be 35 degrees or lower, or there's more than a 40% chance of rain. And so that is a variety of faith-based organizations that volunteer their space as well as their folks to be able to provide that service. And they're open from, I believe it's 6 p.m. at night to 7 a.m. the next morning. So we get that kind of notification maybe a day or two in advance, and we share that again far and wide with folks who are experiencing homelessness to make sure that they're able to step out of that inclement weather. There has been ongoing conversations among our regional action plans about how can we advocate for lifting that temperature threshold for the warming centers, which would create obviously more activations throughout that winter season and more financial resources needed to be able to make that happen. But we will let you know that advocacy opportunity is a county board of supervisors advocacy opportunity, because they oversee and fund the Freedom Warming Centers through the Good Samaritan Shelter. Aaron, I see your hand up.
Barbara, can I add real quick about the
Yes,
cost?
go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, sorry, I just jumped in before the other hand switching the
Absolutely.
topic, but on that warming center discussion, we have been told before that it would cost, how was it, double of the operating to lower that temperature threshold. So, or raise the sorry, I always get confused with weather up and down, but it would take a significant undertaking financially for the warming centers operated through the Samaritan in order to be able to make that change. So, so financial support would be necessary in order to do that.
Absolutely, financial support. Yes, specifically, it's not a huge budget that would need to be doubled, but it is significant. And Liz, I want to mention too the volunteer time. So the volunteer time and capacity it takes to activate Freedom Warming Centers, none of those are paid staff. There's very few paid staff there. So it does take, if there's going to be more activations, it does take both financial resources as well as more volunteer time to make happen. But still, there's always conversation. Definitely, bringing it up as a strategy to be pursued is always there. And I think, making sure that we have every tool available to us is important as well. Aaron?
Yes, thank you, Barbara. I just wanted to comment briefly on the warming center and thank you for putting that information out. So just to clarify, the notifications actually due 48 hours in advance when there is an activation. And it is, I believe it's from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay,
and
great.
Then the information you shared as far as expanding the temperature threshold, I believe is correct. So yes.
Thank you, Aaron. Really appreciate that. Any other questions, comments on the temporary safe shelter program at the Rose Garden Inn? Or again, any other strategies that are being deployed to address unsheltered as well as all individuals experiencing homelessness? So a few things I want to clarify too, and I think this speaks to Larry's comment about misinformation being shared. One is that the Rose Garden Inn temporary safe shelter program was not an experiment. It might have felt like that, but it was not an experiment. And so it was actually a really, and I would say being new to this work over the last couple of years, but even Jeff, who's been doing this work for, I won't say how long, but it's closing in on 2 decades. It was a very unique opportunity. We had been a year into our working groups and our regional action plans meeting. And then the Loma fire happened. And because we had been working closely with, as you can see here, city officials, elected officials, as well as city staff, they wanted to be able to do something to be able to mitigate that fire risk across the city. And they came to the Act on Homelessness Collaborative to talk through what would be the best options for us to both mitigate fire risk as well as address those individuals that would be displaced from the encampments. And there were a lot of service providers providing input to what those best strategies could be. We also looked to other communities that had, over the last couple of years in response to COVID-19, put up what they call kind of designated tent cities or designated temporary safe shelter areas, and learned from them about that experience, the cost, what type of outcomes that they were achieving. So we did, in a very short period of time, broad outreach. We got a lot of input, again, from very experienced service providers, and of the options available to the city council. So there was a number of considerations of areas of city-owned property, public parking lots, as well as other, property that had been discussed many times over, to provide open air temporary safe shelter programs. What would be required we went through summer months, we went through winter months, infrastructure wise, cost wise, service provider wise, as well as the impacts to all the neighborhoods that were being considered and prioritized. We had, again, the unique opportunity to look at expanding what we call non-congregate sheltering. And so given what we were dealing with, which is how do we quickly and strategically mitigate fire risk for the city of Santa Barbara, but provide a temporary safe shelter program that would facilitate more positive outcomes and positive street exits than something in an open air location in another neighborhood. This was where we landed because the city council was willing to make a significant financial investment to make that happen. So I just want to reiterate that the primary objective of this project was to mitigate fire risk for the city of Santa Barbara. So one, the Upper State Street region and neighborhood took on, a lot of that weight to say, okay, how do we help everyone mitigate that fire risk? We wanted to provide an option that individuals being cleared from encampments would actually accept and embrace. And that was hugely successful. Almost every individual that was cleared from encampments accepted the referral to that temporary safe shelter program at the Rose Garden. And there was 63 individuals total served. That is a huge number in a very short period of time. But we have been sharing more of the positive outcome data because it is, how can we leverage that we have the 6 months of time, as well as service provider coordination and financial investment, that we can get folks stabilized and start working them through the system. So that level of document readiness, when that has been taking almost 12 months under COVID to get, again, driver's license, birth certificates, all of the needed necessary information for folks to even access services at all. That is a huge undertaking, and it was a huge success as a result of these folks being stabilized and being able to pursue regular appointments, and the trust and rapport that CityNet built to be able to share data and information, all personal data information of these folks. The fact that 7 individuals were able to achieve employment. Again, access to documents means access to benefits. Some of them were able to pursue employment, and some of them were able to be issued emergency housing vouchers, which again was because of COVID. There was a huge surge in the availability of emergency housing vouchers. So the fact that there was a number of individuals housed within 6 months or less is huge. So I keep saying huge and significant because I really want as many people to understand, before COVID, it took 2 to 4 years to get individuals placed in permanent supportive housing units. So that was the timeline that we were working with. And so any success that we've been able to have in 6 months or less, I just want to congratulate and applaud all of the service providers, as well as the city's huge investment in making this happen. And again, I know that there were impacts experienced and observed and felt by the neighborhood, but there was a careful consideration of how can we mitigate those impacts to the region and to the neighborhood. So on-site security, on-site 24/7 case management, having the Upper State Street regional action plans exist so we can address concerns in real time, law enforcement actively engaged to be able to provide outreach to that area. All of that was committed prior to piloting that program. So I wanted to kind of revisit the planning process, the thoughtful consideration, as well as the urgency. This was all happening in a very quick period of time, again, to mitigate that fire risk over the entire city, I should say. And so we will have the data available to you once the city works with CityNet to be able to confirm that. And then Liz, thank you so much for providing. Yes, the warming center's budget is $260,000 per year. Thank you. I thought it was about 200. So not a huge number in the grand scheme of things if we look to double that, but it is a huge impact to faith-based organizations that provide a weight of the warming centers being able to exist and being able to have the staffing capacity needed to make that happen. So still something that I think should be part of ongoing conversations. I know the Waterfront Regional Action Plan really wants to advocate for more regular activations of the Freedom Warming Centers in that region. So we won't let it go just yet unless someone tells us it's not possible. So we'll keep talking about that and bringing that up as a strategy. Any other comments, questions, both about the temporary safe shelter program at the Rose Garden Inn, Upper State Street, priority regions? And again, this is the community concerns second week wrap meeting focus. So we want to hear from all of you as much as we can as well. Yes, Councilmember Sneddon.
Just thank you. I really need to thank you. I mean, this was that summary that you just made, I think is something for me, I've been struggling to sort of encapsulate that way of what it is that's been so successful about this. And I'm glad you sort of clarified that it wasn't an experiment. I sort of thought of it as an experiment myself. So that's really helpful to me. And just hearing you go through all those steps of all that had to be coordinated to make this happen. And there will be a little transition here where there are a lot of factors happening, but really the emphasis that this was successful in what it did, and particularly that timeline that you just laid out, the difference between how long it usually takes to get housing. So I just didn't want to miss the chance to say thank you.
No, I want to share the gratitude to all of the service provider partners that came together to really advocate for the best possible option given the objective we were kind of confronted with, and that objective being mitigating fire risk. So I appreciate the ingenuity. I appreciate too that we started down one path of kind of open air temporary safe shelter, and thought if we just had some more resources, maybe we could facilitate a better option. And this was the best option that was available to us because the City Council and your leadership, Councilmember Sneddon and Councilmember Friedman and Councilmember Gutierrez is also here, that unanimously supported that decision moving forward. So I think for us that the tough part is that the week happened to be that the shelters weren't taking new referrals. And so I know CityNet had worked months and months to build trust and rapport with these folks to even get them to accept a referral to emergency shelter after being in a non-congregate setting is tough in itself. So when people mention resistance to services, this is part of that. If folks are given a huge opportunity and they feel at the end the system has failed them, it takes them that much more to say yes again. So it really is so key that as we think about any strategies, both temporary and long-term or short-term and long-term, that we're thinking about that piece of how can we continue to engage folks, build that trust and rapport, and make sure that it is a pathway, that it is a continuum, and that these strategies are considered in terms of individuals experiencing trauma, experiencing failings in a lot of ways in their life, as we again look at these short-term kind of fixes. And Brad, if you have anything to add to that, I know it's just kind of like that moment of we were so close.
No, I mean, that was a masterclass in explaining. I mean, the reality is, right? So there's like, what can we do now? What are the long-term solutions? I know the answer is like, let's build housing and house everybody. I would love to be able to do that. I would love to snap my fingers and, purchase motels and build projects that allow bridge housing, because what is true is exactly what you laid out. There are ways to resolve this. Now, the Rose Garden, again, was available immediately, not sort of immediately, but quickly. Bridge housing is the way to do it in terms of the transition. It's not the only, it's not the end all be all, but wouldn't it be great if, is the question I start thinking about, and our teams go out every day and it's like, we don't want to be here 80+%, even higher in this case, because of the option. And many of those people, that was the first time we talked to them on the first day we went out there. And it went from like zero relationship to getting them to accept yes. So the way you laid that out was perfect. I think there are lessons to be learned here as terms of models, not just like what was bad and good. That we'll talk about those too. but just sort of how does something like this strategically fit into a master game plan for the city for us to get to functional zero,
Right.
which is the goal? What do we need to put in place,
That system
starting
flow.
with the end in mind, so that homelessness with those folks that are from here, not that we create a bunch of everybody comes here, but how do we get to be where homeless is rare, brief, and non-reoccurring?
Right.
That's the goal.
Right.
And things like this are part of that strategy.
And Marilyn's mentioning the Dignity Moves modular units in downtown city of Santa Barbara. Even that, so the Dignity Moves was scheduled for a January start. And so we were thinking in a beautiful way that as the Rose Garden Inn program transitioned, we would be able to place a number of folks in the modular units going into downtown Santa Barbara. So, but again, delayed because of COVID, and by a few months, and they're set to be open in April. So there was a couple of hits along the way, folks. I just want to be honest and transparent about that things could have been slightly different, but still overall really positive outcomes for the opportunity that we were given over a 6-month period of time. Liz? I see your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to answer a couple of questions. There was a question higher up about the grand jury, who warms them, and is it heating only? No. So the warming centers are funded with, the city provides a small grant. We gave them $8,500 last year. They do apply for human services funding every year, so they have been recipients every year. But that's only a small portion. The rest comes from other city and county grants because they are a countywide operation, and they get a small amount from foundations. So that makes up some of the $260,000. The warming centers, they operate at churches, so they don't have a site. It's just a safe place to go at night. So the costs are mostly for salaries of a couple of staff people, but the rest is volunteer driven. So there's a coordinator and lead staff that kind of works with clients. A new thing that the warming centers is doing this year that wasn't done before when it was operated by a different organization. Good Samaritan is now going to be entering clients who come to the warming centers into the homeless management information system database, which is great. That allows us to be able to coordinate services better. Service providers that are participating organizations such as CityNet and other organizations can see if these are people that are already getting services and help coordinate those services better. So that's a great change that Good Samaritan taking over that warming center is doing. The other question I think about that Marilyn had about the Dignity Moves project, I think Barbara and Jeff can elaborate a little bit about the coordinated entry system and how clients are going to be selected for that project. But the other thing I wanted to say that I really liked about the Dignity Moves project is that the reporting has been very clear that it's for clients that have been pre-screened. Unfortunately, announcing that this new housing thing is available without explaining who's getting in there can attract people to the area. So I'm glad that one of the lessons we learned is to make it really clear that no, you can't just show up and expect to get housing. You have to be part of this coordinated entry system. You get into the coordinated entry system by being in the homeless management system database. So these are the important things that are happening. And yeah, you can elaborate on the coordinated entry, how that operates.
Yes. And Jeff will be facilitating again any impacts experienced in the region at our State Street Regional Action Plan meetings that occur on Fridays at 11. Although it's not directly near State Street, it's only a couple of blocks off. So we know as folks are experiencing that Dignity Moves kind of bridge housing program opening up in April, that we'll be able to capture any concerns that are happening and be able to address those on Fridays during that regional action plan meeting as well. And we want to hear from all of you as you frequent downtown and again, go on long walks when you're able to do that. That if you have observations you want to share on this call, you can absolutely do that. We have a really close partnership with Good Samaritan Shelter, who's going to be running that operation, and we can have them on this call at any time. And then Aaron, who also works with Good Samaritan at the Day Center, can make sure that there's representation here as needed as well. Any other questions, comments? And Marilyn, I think Liz was able to address some of what you mentioned, but the only criteria for the temporary safe shelter program at the Rose Garden Inn was that they were in existing encampments that were being cleared to mitigate fire risk. So again, a lot of those individuals were deeply entrenched in those encampments. And so like Brad mentioned, starting kind of from zero with some of those clients in terms of building relationships and rapport with them to where they are now is incredibly significant and really positive overall. So as we're able to facilitate referrals now to emergency shelter, if they're open to it, we'll be able to do that because CityNet is actively engaged with almost all of those individuals, as Brad said, except for one.
Yeah, and just to put a finer point on that, just because so that is also a best practice. So just to give sort of backing to the council decision, it might be more ideal in some sense if you're looking at the stability of clients to operate motels, for example, that are more of a sort of a current caseload, people that can't make it into shelters, let's do that. But we have operated a number of cases where it is exactly like this, actually, where the decision is something needs to be done, and because for whatever reason there's a sense of emergency, fire and other, where it immediately goes from a clearing of a large encampment, offering, being relentless in our offering of services, and then moving into an immediate bridge housing situation. We've done a number of those projects all across Southern California. So these are sort of models of best practice that do emerge, and this was aligned with best practices for situations that required an immediate response.
Right. And I also want to clarify that the units that are going into downtown, it is a bridge housing program. It's not permanent supportive housing. So it is to stabilize folks and be able to facilitate the documentation readiness process further, as well as working with accessing vouchers and being able to place them in permanent supportive housing. So it is only a 3-year program, and those modular units will be looked to be able to move to kind of transition to another location after that period of time as well. Councilmember Friedman.
Thank you, Barbara. So run out of time. I wanted to thank you for kind of summarize you and others for summarizing the steps that took for the Rose and get there. But I also wanted to appreciate that we did have, such as these wraps, we had additional law enforcement up there during that time to try to mitigate those concerns. But I think these weekly regional action plan meetings have been helpful for the community and the public to come in because we're hearing directly from them. And then to be able to once a month use this time to go out and actually visit those spots. I know Councilmember Sneddon and I and some others and some members of the community walked up Hope all the way around Hitchcock. We toured the Rose together, and with those neighborhood residents, we were walking areas that we might not normally have walked, and we were able to point out to us where these encampments were and things that we hadn't seen as maybe council members or even the public, but the public was also able to point out to us things that we as service providers might not have seen. So I appreciate the value of this going forward and that it's still going to continue, because I think there's much more work to be done, and there are still impacts in the community of homelessness in general. So to have this forum is very helpful. So I just wanted to put that out there. So thank you.
Agreed. Our commitment is that you'll see all of our beautiful faces weekly. And we want to continue to engage with you and hear from you. And we do recognize that everyone is impacted by homelessness, every neighborhood in the city of Santa Barbara, and that we want to be able to address your concerns in a timely and positive way. So a couple of things to end our call. So when it comes to solutions, in terms of more permanent supportive housing units and options, the County of Santa Barbara and the County Housing Authority are pursuing acquisition of the Super 8 Motel in Old Town Goleta to be able to acquire for permanent supportive housing for individuals experiencing homelessness. This is, I believe, 60 units that would be available if the state approves. So we should hear very shortly if we were approved for a Project Home Key grant. Then 8 months from now, there would be 60 units available. That would be, again, a very significant positive impact to be able to place 60 individuals. Oh my goodness, it would be huge in that region. So tonight they're having an informational meeting at 6 o'clock. We provided the registration link on the agenda. We encourage you to show up. You know, it really is important. There's a lot of key elected officials, key service provider partners that are listening in, positive comments advocating that we need it. We need it in every neighborhood, in every community to be able to address systemic and chronic homelessness across our region. We need supporters for these housing units to be able to happen. So because of your experiences on the Upper State Street region, your hands-on engagement and making sure that, again, that reducing impacts in the neighborhood and reducing homelessness overall, we love to have your voices on calls like that. If you're, again, supportive and again, if you want to share your concerns too, if we want to take extra steps to be able to say, okay, how can we embrace these permanent housing developments for individuals experiencing homelessness in neighborhoods? These are some concerns that we had. This is how they were able to be addressed. We want to make sure that, again, the neighborhood's engaged, actively committed to coordinating and supporting these solutions overall. All voices, all perspectives, we want to hear from you. So that's tonight at 6 o'clock. And Jane, yes, it's the Super 8 Motel in Old Town Goleta. It would be permanent supportive housing, not bridge housing. So it would be long-term 60 units, I believe there. Any other last comments, questions, concerns before we exit the call? And again, next week, we will not be meeting virtually. We'll be conducting a site visit, and we'll let you know the specific region and time if you'd like to join us next week. All right, thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time, engagement, your honesty. Again, really, really important for us to work together to make sure that we're improving our city and making sure our neighborhoods are safe and that individuals experiencing homelessness are getting the support they need. So we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the week.